everyone. Hello, everyone. Welcome on Let's Talk AI. I'm super happy today to be with Alexandre Denis. So I will ask you, Alexandre, to introduce yourself for the people to know you a little bit better. But first of all, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm great. Thanks, Thomas. I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you here also. So to the people who might not know you, uh, what do you do and how would you describe yourself? It can be professionally, but also outside of work.
Well, I would say I'm a programmer first. I learned programming when I was a kid, and I really enjoyed it. And that's why I continued in engineering and artificial intelligence. So yeah, I would say my first, let's say, property or feature would be I'm a programmer. And
Okay.
then, since I was interested in AI, I continued in that field. And yeah, I have a lot of interest, like psychology, video games, many things. And well, I don't know whether maybe you want me to introduce myself from the beginning to up to now, or
So
I
like
don't
for
know.
okay,
Up
tell
to
me
you.
about all your life. No, no, of course. I will like to ask you more details question regarding like your journey and what you've done so far,
Sure.
whether it's personal interest, your programming. We've talked a bit about video games. I really want to know more about that and like how to implement AI in video games. This is
Hmm.
a very interesting topic. Um, we might also talk about Erudit,
Hmm.
like different projects you've worked on. I'm super interested on that. But if we start by your what you're doing today, what are you working on right now, and what are your um, like main focus things at the moment?
Well, there are several. First, there's indeed the professional one, right? That
Hmm.
takes most of my day. And currently, I'm a freelancer working as a research engineer
Okay.
for several customers. And the main one is indeed Erudit, in a dance company where they want to find the key indicators. It's an HRtech, so it's in that area, and they want to find the voice of employee from their text messages. That is, they
Mm.
analyze the text messages and find indicators regarding well-being or the personal appraisal of the work, this kind of things, from the chat messages and the mails and this kind of text inputs. And the work lies between different areas. There's a fair amount of NLP, of course, since we're
Hmm.
analyzing text, but there's also the psychological aspects. That is, how should we model the different features we want to extract from text to describe the employees and their
Yes.
personal appraisal of their work or the environment, this kind of things.
All right. That's super interesting. Every time I talk about Erudit, we've had already Ricardo on the podcast. I recommend everyone
Nice,
to listen
cool.
to Ricardo's episode. It's super interesting. We talk about a lot of different things, and every time I talk about Erudit and how yourself and the team works with people who are in the field of psychology
Mm,
to like define things. Uh,
mm,
I'm always I always wonder um, because when I tell to people about Erudit, uh, there is one question that always comes. It is RGPD. Like, how do
mm,
you like? Is there a way, for example, people in the company,
mm.
like for example, managers or leaders, could use all the work that you guys are doing on using just text messages on group
Yeah.
chats and all of that, is there a way that they can use in a bad way to like be harder on the people, or like how do you guys do at Erudit to manage the RGPD and data
Well,
confidentiality and
there are several answers to this question. First, there's the data perspective, that is how you handle the data.
mm-hmm,
You can have several levels of anonymization, for instance.
mm-hmm,
The very basic one is pseudonymization, that is where you would just remove some metadata information by just discarding the user names or user emails, whatever. And there's the in-content anonymization, where you would just alter the content of the text, the messages, to just strip out personal information, this kind of things, such that you can work with the data but without all this personal information.
mm,
And regarding the second question of whether you can use it for bad reasons, I guess yeah. I mean, that's we are providing some tools, some data analytics, and then it's up to the people to use them. But I may not be the best person to answer to that particular question, because I'm mostly interested in modeling the phenomena that are behind how people express themselves, and how you would model that, and then present that in some meaningful way. As to the use of this information, we have some level of control, like the anonymization aspects. We also are we take care of not disclosing this kind of information, like the names, or in the tool itself. So
yes,
there are some layer of security, but
mm-hmm.
it's true that in the end it's like a knife. For instance, a knife, you can cut bread, you can kill people with it. It's a multi-purpose tool. So
I
yeah,
always use a very similar analogy. I always tell about an axe. An axe
an
can
axe,
cut a tree,
knife.
an axe also can kill someone.
That's the same. That's the same.
But yeah, but like the anonymization part is always what concerns, because people might think, oh my god, they will be able to read all my conversations, and no, of course it's not like that. There is like anonymization
Yeah.
process, and so so yeah, and I
Yes, and
understand that this is mandatory in Europe, not to have this kind of process to protect the data of people.
yes, there are these requirements. There's the need, or the you have to be able to destroy any kind of data you may have saved.
Mm-hmm.
So there is some protection, of course. I think
Mm,
in the US it's less protected than in Europe, much less,
mm.
I think. So yeah.
Okay, well, thanks. Okay, I wanted to, because you said it, I wanted to get directly to this point. Anonymization is an interesting aspect, and like not being able to keep the data and being like having to delete it. All of these things are implemented in Europe. I know the laws are different.
Hmm.
In China, for example, we can do a lot of
Oh my
things
God.
if we work with the government,
China, yeah.
a lot of bad things.
Oh my God.
But great, let's get back to your background and who
Hmm?
you are. So
Yeah,
could you kind of take us back with you on your journey with AI,
sure.
and just like a
Yeah,
bit what you've done, the projects you've seen,
yeah.
and your historic.
So yeah, I think my interest is it's like a very long time ago, when actually I was a kid or a teenager, and I was like coding all these games, and was interested in how you would emulate some kind of intelligent or human-like behavior in games.
Yes.
And yeah, this was like, I thought about this very early on. So then when I had my engineering degree, I specialized in knowledge engineering. So knowledge engineering is the like a branch of artificial intelligence, if you will. Like it's how we were modeling truth, logics, this kind of things, ontologies,
Ontologies,
and
yeah.
and then it was in my internship, actually, that
Mhm.
I joined a laboratory
Okay.
to do my yeah, final year internship, and it was on multimodal dialogue systems, which are actually kind of chatbots. Now we would say chatbots. It's a bit different because they are uh, practical. They are oriented, task oriented,
Okay.
and it was a nice system where you would like use your gesture and speech at the same time to
Okay.
like on a map you would say, okay, I want to go there, I want to go there. It would compute some pathfinding and would just interact with you, ask you questions, this kind of things.
Mm.
And well, it was, yeah, quite novel at the time to use tablets. I was in 2003, so like 20 years ago. That's yeah, it's like the you had a pencil for the tablet. Yeah, you didn't use your finger, of course. And yeah, so it was very interesting because I had the opportunity to understand or to discover all the different building blocks of such dialogue systems. And at the time, they were like separated, like different modules you would just try to plug together.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's more, we are moving more towards end-to-end architectures. But at the time, you had to focus your work on, for instance, the speech recognition, then the lexical analysis, then syntactic analysis, semantic analysis, reference, dialogue generation, all these different kinds of modules. You have to
Mm-hmm.
bring them together and make them work. And we did a lot of things back then, like trying to figure out what would be the glue language between all these modules. How could you make all these modules interact and talk to each other? So yeah, there was designing this glue language, developing the model, developing the whole system, making it work. Was very interesting, very cool. So when they asked me whether I wanted to continue there, like with a master and a PhD, I said, okay, that's cool. So let's do
Mm-hmm.
it. I did first my master.
Okay.
I was in computational linguistics on the particular problem of reference resolution, reference modeling. You know,
Okay.
reference, it's when you have linguistic, the pronouns, this kind of things. Actually, it can be very intricate. And at the time, we were trying to model the all the linguistic phenomena and the mental phenomena, the mental state, where you would bring them together. That you would build an interpretation that is partially complete because you don't have the pronouns, you have
Mm-hmm.
a kind of logical forms of what you are expressing, and then you try to somehow complete it and try to find in the context what are the reference for the pronouns or uh, all the non-phrases. And so it was very linguistic oriented approach, very cool, very interesting. And then after the master I went to the PhD, where I worked on many topics. It was very open-ended, but the general theme of the PhD was common ground, the grounding process. That is how
Yeah.
two individuals or a human and a machine can chat together by building a common ground. By
Okay.
it's like it's a concept that stems from philosophy or psychology or linguistics,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like the how could you say it? It's like a shared body of knowledge that you would
Okay.
use to produce your messages, but also you would build up through interaction, through time. And I was looking at all the cases where this process would break down. That is,
Mm.
when you don't understand each other, you don't hear the other one, or you misinterpret. For instance, there's a quiproquo,
Okay.
there's a misunderstanding, and then you have like a different interpretation of the same messages,
Mm-hmm.
and this misunderstanding can last. That's the thing. It can last for several for some time,
Okay.
and then in the end where you just, oh my god, I know you were meaning that, or you were meaning that person, then you
Mm-hmm.
would have to like somehow reinterpret all the past, and this kind of intricate processes, and how you would model that from the computational linguistic
Mm-hmm.
perspective. That is, it's a bit different from NLP. where you would mostly do signal processing, this kind of thing, or word discrete signal processing. But here, yeah, it's like trying to model this from insights from philosophy, psychology, logics, discourse analysis,
Mm-hmm.
all these areas. So yeah, it was very cool, and I did many other things. It's just like the tip of the iceberg. And then I did two postdocs to continue in this direction. The first one was a bit in the continuation of this work, in the grounding and common ground, and it was more targeted towards online communities. That is
Mm.
how people online are interacting to build common knowledge, and how they are building a common practice for a certain area or certain domain. We were working more precisely on Wikipedia and how people are interacting to build the Wikipedia pages. That is how they are. Yeah, what are the kind of interaction? And more precisely, again, we looked at the conflicts. That is how when people are conflicting, and they have conflicts about the end task, which is building the page, and
Mm-hmm.
how these conflicts spawn, um, how they are resolved, how they evolve through time, and yeah, it was very interesting. We worked with a lot of cool people. So the then the second postdoc was yeah, no, first, yeah, at this postdoc there's something interesting that while we were investigating the conflict,
Mm-hmm.
we specifically looked at sentiment analysis. That is trying to find the polarity of a sentence.
Okay.
That is to say, if a sentence is mostly positive, negative, neutral, it's the simplest version of this task would be given a message, output one of these three category, and then we used it to yeah, to classify the messages, but to describe a conversation or a conflict, and
Okay.
then yeah. Do you have a question, or I mean,
No, no,
otherwise
no.
it's a tunnel. I'm go.
I was, I was like following and
Okay.
yeah. Please go ahead. Go
Okay,
ahead.
okay.
I'm tuned.
So, okay, cool. So yeah, we worked on this sentiment analyzer, and the funny thing is that for this task, initially I used the classical approach, like
Okay.
modeling using symbolic analysis, using lexicons, using syntactic rules like valence shifting rules, where you would say, for instance, I'm not happy. If you have the negation, then you revert the positive polarity of happy. That
Mm.
you would build this kind of rules, which in the end turned quite difficult if you want to be really to have a good analysis. And but I tried machine learning back then. It was like in 2010 or something like that, and maybe a bit earlier. And yeah, it was much easier, much easier, much more efficient for this task. Much definitely 100 times more easier.
Okay.
Easier. So yeah, that's where I realized that maybe yeah we should we should look into that. Nonetheless,
Into
yeah. Sorry.
machine learning, right? And
Yeah.
into
To include more machine learning in the mix. I don't despise, of course, the symbolic analysis, which has a lot of virtues, and
mm-hmm.
we may talk about that. That's a world topic by its own.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I was interested in this like more organic thing. That is the sentiment analysis. It was a bit different from the thing that people were doing back then, because
Yes.
there was a lot of interest in logics, where you would analyze the semantics of a sentence.
Okay.
But here it's more related to the connotation area. That is, um, you would not describe this in terms of truth values, but rather a kind of properties of the messages that are not akin to true values. It's something a bit different. There's a lot of subjectivity in there,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore the second postdoc I was looking into other kind of it was a different project, international project with a lot of partners, where we looked at empathic products. That the goal of the project was to explore different kind of products that would be labeled empathic. That is, they would be aware of the emotions and
Mm-hmm.
intentions of the user and would
Yes.
adapt better to the users.
Okay.
And this in this project we continue the work of the sentiment analysis, and we looked at emotion detection. That is how you would do basically the same thing, but with a greater set of classes.
Okay.
Would be the ones that we used were the Ekman emotions. So we looked at the the Ekman emotions like joy, sadness,
Okay.
fear, surprise, disgust. These are the main five.
Okay.
And yeah, so we did this emotion analyzer, and and we applied it in several cases. So that was pretty cool. And the last year I loved it. So these guys, they were awesome. By the way, these are the guys from the L'Oréal laboratory in Nancy. They are pretty
Okay.
awesome, a very good research laboratory, and they granted me like the last year some money to do whatever I wanted, and I worked at a video game that I wanted to explore and build, which it was the game was called Emosim. Like, well, I'm not so good at finding names, but emotion simulation, Emosim. And yeah, the goal was to try to tackle the emotion modeling. That is how you would model in an NPC, a non-player character,
Yes.
the emotions. That is how the emotion would spawn, when, and how would it evolve, how would it be resolved and disappear, replaced by another emotion, depending on the situation. And that was not easy, but it was very cool. The game, you can find it. It's on the web. It's on my website.
Awesome.
And yeah, so for 1 year I developed this project, and it was pretty awesome. And also, yeah, very hard, because you have to combine two different things that do not go well together, or hard to control. That is, you need to, on one hand, model emotions that are realistic, or that somehow make sense, but also you have the goal of making the game fun. And what happens is that the reality of, or the model that you are building, okay, is the good one, I mean, but then it's not fun. I
Yes.
mean, if it's not fun, then you have a bad game, and therefore you just have to alter your model of emotions. So that's intricate, because I had to make some compromises, and just to to be less rigorous than we would be on the classical academic
Mm.
point of view. So yeah, that was very nice. But then I left the public research to
Okay.
move towards the private sector, and I
Okay.
was also interested in finding out how what are people are doing in this in the private sector, and how are they approaching problems, how they are building things.
Yes.
And the first job I had in the private sector was the head of R&D, of the NLP aspect of R&D at a Fintech.
Okay.
So it was rather different from the my former experience,
I
and
can
it
imagine.
was pretty interesting. It was at the very beginning of the startup. So and they were trying to analyze a big amount of data, and to perform some kind of sentiment analysis on the data, in order to predict the stock market, or to be related to the stock market to some extent,
Mm-hmm.
forecasting and this kind of things. And so the challenges at the time were to, yeah, the sheer amount of data, that you had to process, and you have to make some compromise in terms of the analysis you want to do on the messages, and how you would like aggregate all these messages such that
Yes.
the end signal could be used
Mm-hmm.
by another, like let's say for instance a regression or an auto-regression on the stock prices, such that you can mix the sentiment signal and the price signal, and then in order to predict the future. And so yeah, it was pretty awesome, pretty cool. I learned a lot of things regarding big data, and it was also the opportunity to explore different kind of sentiment analysis.
Mm.
That is to look for targeted sentiment analysis.
Mm.
So the targeting here, it means about which expression in the sentence you would have your sentiment towards. That is, for instance, if you say, I hate apples, but I love cheese.
Yes.
Apples negative, but cheese positive. So this kind of modeling it can go very far in terms of the kind of information you are analyzing, because the problem is actually pretty complex. Because if you say, for instance, I used to hate apples, but now I love them, so this is now temporal. You see, you have two sentiment, but one is in the past, one is in now. And there
Yes.
is also the irrealist, the conditionals, like you say, I would love apples if blah blah blah. So it's not positive, but maybe it's not exactly neutral either. So yeah, this kind of phenomena, how you would model them is very complex, and yeah, so that was very interesting. But at some time, I wanted to change and explore other things, and this is when I changed my status to be a freelancer and a
Okay.
consultant for R&D matters at all levels of the R&D domain or tasks, if you want.
Okay.
There is
Mm-hmm.
the part regarding grants proposal, where you would like write projects, define all the structure of a project, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, where you would like how there's this task, how can I do it in 3 years, and
Yes.
how far we can go in 3 years, this kind of planning and management. There is also all the aspects regarding the development itself. That is the research and development, how you would do the research, and how from the research you can do the actual development. How can it yeah, the day-to-day work that you have to do in order to build the AI tools. And so I had several clients, and my first main one was in HRtech. So I went from Fintech to HRtech, which it was a good move, because I think I wanted to explore more the psychology, get back to the psychology matters.
Yes.
Um, and but yeah, this company in HR tech, they were mostly doing the, well, they are still mostly doing, they are doing well, they are doing the matching between resumes and job offers after parsing. So you would just parse your documents and then try to match them. Overall,
Okay.
they are doing other things, of course, but I worked on this area by exploring the kind of documents, that the HR documents at hand, mostly focusing on what kind of information are there, how you would structure them, model them, extract them, with which models, with which quality, and all these aspects.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I worked with a great team. That was pretty cool. But then I wanted to get back to more the psychology core, and that's
Yes.
why I worked with Erudit to, yeah, because now with Erudit I work with real psychologists that are very good, and then yeah, we explore all these phenomena, and how the people are behaving or are expressing themselves, how they are feeling.
Mm.
And yeah, and there's a lot to cover. Yeah, we have many things to do. So yeah, so we are
Wow.
now, and then we
Wow.
are now. Sorry, I spoke
Well,
for like 20 minutes.
let me tell you, that was I didn't say anything because I was just hearing and living with you like all your career, and I know like you left out a lot of project and side projects that you might have done, but
Yeah,
I think it
I
really
got.
gives a big overview of anyone that wants to know more about you. Like everyone is thinking of how like paying you as a freelance on their project. Well, here they have your curriculum. I guess
Yeah.
if they were having doubts now they shouldn't.
That's cool. Thanks.
But
Yeah.
I have so many questions though,
Sure.
because
Sure.
as
Go
I
ahead.
was listening to everything you said, you mentioned different points that I really loved. Uh, Different points are, for example, you talk about gluing different models together
Mm,
early at the beginning of what you
yeah.
said. You talk about video games and putting AI into the NPCs. Is it correct?
Mm,
NPCs,
mm,
yes.
yeah.
That's super interesting. That I wanted to get back on that.
Sure.
I would also like to ask you some questions about like sentiment analysis. How would you approach specific problems? I have a specific thing that I was thinking the other day. I might share it with you to have
Mm-hmm.
your point of view on it. And also, you talk about being a researcher going to the private sector.
Mm,
That's super interesting. Also, I feel
mm.
so. So stay tuned because after this very impressive resume, we're going to a bit deep dive into the
Yeah,
things.
sure.
So,
Okay.
so first of all, I would like to ask you about if you have so you talked about gluing the models
Mm,
together,
yeah.
and I really at the beginning you
Yes.
struggled with that. Today at Erudit, I would assume that there are many models working and you need to mix them.
Yes.
How would you approach things
Well,
like that?
yeah, first, the let's say model gluing is it was a necessity back then. Maybe now it's less required because
Okay.
we are moving towards end-to-end architectures. So, but back then it was pretty hard. I mean, we didn't have that the advances on machine learning, neural networks that we had in the after 2010. Mostly, we had, of course, a lot of work before that we shouldn't,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But it really exploded, at least in the NLP field. After like the Colbert paper in 2011, I was
Mm.
like, wow, you can do all these tasks using a neural network without almost no lexicons, no module specifics,
Mm-hmm.
because back then you had really you have to see like a pipeline. Really, you have
Okay.
these modules that you they were kind of similar to how you would tackle compilers. When the compiler for a formal language would
Mm-hmm.
have to all do all these analysis steps,
Yes.
tokens, syntax, semantics, execution, these kind of things, and the interpretation pipeline, where you would have your message in the input, and the output would have a logical form that you could use to query your database or do truth or reasoning or this kind of
Mm-hmm.
things. But the all these modules, they were coming from different areas, different specialties, if you want.
Mm-hmm.
So you have like all the syntax part, that the goal back then was to really parse the sentences and build a syntactic structure from the messages. And then this syntactic structure, you would try to build a logical form from it. There is imagine that you had to identify the subject, the verb, the object, and then from this you would have to convert it. So imagine that you have a syntactic tree. You have to convert it in a logical world where you would do your reasoning. But now, and therefore, yeah, you had to have this glue language between all independent modules. That is how you would convert a logical form, or how would you model the either the syntactic view of the message and the semantic view on the message, and the data view. That is, imagine you perform your query on a database, how you would get your results in such form that is unified across your architectures. But now it's a I would say it's still present in some form. This the need of having this glue language.
Mm-hmm.
However, they now, as I said, the big trend is to move towards end-to-end language models or
Yes.
architectures, and therefore this need is less important in terms of transport of information or modeling, because you would have like your big end-to-end architecture that takes your inputs and your output, and you train your model by having these pairs of input output pairs, and then you would train your model to, from the input, produce this kind of output. So
Yes.
therefore the need of, first, you don't have all these submodules but just an end-to-end architecture, which
Mm-hmm.
it is interesting because you have a lot of benefits but also some drawbacks of using this kind of approach.
Yeah.
The main benefit is that you you don't have error propagation. There is,
Okay.
having this kind of layered analysis has the main shortcoming that if you do an error at the beginning of your pipeline, then this error propagates until the end.
Okay.
Therefore, if you fail to parse a sentence, you fail to connect an object to its verb, for instance, then you are guaranteed at the syntactic stage, you are guaranteed to be unable to build your logical form where you would do your end query in a database. Whereas now, since you move toward the end-to-end analysis,
Yes.
you can use, let's say, information from all other levels. That is, you can use syntactic information and semantic information at the same time,
Mm.
and you can like reduce the amount of errors, and therefore somehow it's in well, no, it's not somehow, it's really more robust than the
Okay.
pipeline oriented approach. The
Mm.
downside with this is that you will fail to have a particular perspective on your data. That is, in the pipeline approach, your modules, sequential modules, you can like probe your model, your system, for, let's say, syntactic errors or
Yes.
semantic errors, and then the model is able to react or use this information. For instance, oh, maybe I'm missing a syntactic relationship here. I need to do some action. Maybe in the interaction, I need to get into the why is there this link missing, or to ask some more clarification. If there's an expression that the system does not understand, it will know that it does not understand it for
Mm-hmm.
this and these reasons, and then
Mm-hmm.
it can act upon it because it has a marker to do so. Whereas
Okay.
now this problem is tackled differently in the current architectures, and to be honest, they are doing not so bad actually. Like the Chat GPT, which
Mm.
I guess we should talk at some point, but
Yes.
yeah, it is able to know when it doesn't know, and it can give some information about it, but to some extent it's able to do that. However, I'm not sure if we can. Well, it's so powerful, it's so gigantic. So to know what it cannot do and really describe it is much harder. Actually, in the end-to-end approach, it's much harder because you have, the interpretability of neural networks is hard. It's a whole topic where you have to build like a special procedure to either discover the weights precisely where the values, or just degrade your, you can degrade your input and see how the model behaves on the degraded input. That means that
Yes.
on this aspect of the input text, the model behaves like that. So it's much harder to understand what's going on in this large language models or large networks or architectures, as opposed to the pipeline one. But the benefit, I mean, is so big that to be much more robust, because that was the problem that plagued the systems back in the early days, where you would just build a super system that works in a very narrow area. Now they tackled the robustness by using the pre-training on very large amount of data, and making sure to build systems that are pretty generic. Like
Yes.
ChatGPT can do anything, a lot of things. It's not without defects, but is pretty amazing. And yeah, so that's the question about the glue language.
I feel
It's
like we
just
cover it up. I was wondering though, would you have any, for example, let's say I had this thing, I have this post coming about cyberbullying online, and I have this idea of using NLP to like detect when people send harmful texts, for example, harmful messages. But
mm,
like the idea is not to impact liberty of expression, of course not. Like the
mm,
idea is just to, like, everyone is able to criticize or anything, but
mm,
there is a level where it becomes hate, like when you're
mhm,
over sending negative comments towards
mm,
one person and all of
yeah,
that. And so the idea is to like build a pipeline of different models
mm,
that are able to do this distinction.
yeah.
Now, to a guy like me, for example, that have not your expertise, you were talking about pipelines and new technologies and new ways to glue things together. Would you have some names of technology that you would recommend to use to people, like how to like starting point and then going?
Yeah, they are. I cannot give you a specific, because
Of
it's a
course.
whole area. I think that just if you do some research, I guess you can find the latest. I would
For
approach
sure.
it this way. So you can search for papers, you can search for existing tools that do hateful speech
Hmm.
recognition or classification. Otherwise, there is the two big strategies to handle this. Is the first one is classical supervised learning, where you would have a bunch of messages, and then you would classify them, and you know that this message is a hate speech, this message is not, this message is hate speech, and you will build a big database. I'm pretty sure that already exists, by the way. And then you build a supervised classification on this, using whatever model you want. I mean, there are plenty, there are many. I would go for Hugging Face models that are
Mm.
very straightforward to use,
And
very easy. So this
and
is
would
the
you do
main
it in the
approach. Yeah.
cloud directly, like Azure products, AWS, or it doesn't really matter to you? You've used it all, and
For me, it doesn't really matter. I would just get the data and get a machine with a GPU, of course,
yeah.
and get the training done, doing a careful evaluation about its the classification abilities. But it may be time consuming, because you will have to build if the data does not exist. Like this problem, the one you are referring to is pretty generic. I think it's you should do some research about it, but I think it's pretty generic, and I guess you would find some data about it. But if you have a
Hmm.
problem that is much more fine-grained or very more difficult, then you will have difficulties finding some data. And then
Yes.
if there's no data there, you would have to build your data. And this is where the problems start to be really real, because how you would define the boundary between hateful, non-hateful, uh,
Exactly.
it's maybe very subtle, and the amount of data you would need might be, yeah, it's hard to come up with a number. And they are building models that try to work with less amount of data. So it's I would just do some experiment about it,
Mm-hmm.
build a small data set or find it and train a model.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also the other approach, which is more trending now, which is the meta learning and all the prompting. When you all the GPT approach, where you would just describe your problems in few examples. In the few shot learning, you would just say, okay, here are examples of hateful speech. This is hateful, this is not hateful. You give few examples, and then you ask the model, how what is this message, is it hateful or not. So since it's a very large language model, it will have already in its latent space a lot of information stored regarding the polarity, the sentiment, the hate, love, hate
Mm,
relations, many semantic concepts regarding that, and expression, and therefore it might be able to give some answer, and that's
mm,
that's pretty cheap in the sense of that does not require a lot of effort. However, you have the quality control, because then my issue with this is it's very cool. You can do a lot of things very fast, but then it's in general in lower quality than the supervised approach, because in the
mm,
supervised approach you can be really fine-grained and say and really define what you mean by hateful. By when you give all the examples, it's like a definition of what means hateful.
mm.
Therefore, when using prompts and GPT-3, ChatGPT's kind of approach, um, you may face, yeah, a quality control. And by the way, it's how they built it. They built this, they have these big language models, and after that they have a phase where they would control the quality of what is said by having, well, not exactly supervised learning but reinforcement learning,
Yes.
where they would just make sure that the outputs are satisfying enough for a human reader, and also that it makes sure that it is not hateful itself. But
Mm-hmm.
they are using a lot of data to do that, a lot of annotation. So that's the thing. That's the core truth behind all this is data, is the machine learning. It's the models, they are doing a lot, of
Mm-hmm.
course, but it's what is in the data, how you would
Yeah.
describe the data. And back then, it was something we knew already. The data contains a lot, but back then the algorithms were very specific, very narrow to some tasks, and the big progress of the past 15 years was to build architectures and models that are very generic. That's the thing. And then since they were very generic, they were able to consume a lot of different kinds of data, and even do the trick, the big trick that changed everything regarding, like masking. Or you remove a word and you ask the model what would be that word, like language models. You would
Mm-hmm.
train the model in a self-supervised way, and therefore you can use all the data that you can possibly. You don't need annotation, which is the part that is costly. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but you can do both. That's the cool thing, is that you can use a model that is trained on a large amount of data, of course, and then fine tune it on your particular problem, hoping that you will require less data,
Yes.
as opposed to if you would have started from scratch. That's
Awesome.
so yeah.
Awesome. I hope it helps you guys who are listening. Let us know what you think and what is your approach, and what have you done so far. I would be super interested to know about it. Just to conclude on my little ID, the ID would be an output of an angry emoji along the name of the person on the socials, for example, Twitter. And like you could have like you could only see yourself at the beginning, like if you send in private message hate to someone, and if you're abusing of it, then it will be public, so you won't be restrained by anything, but you will be able to see this little emoji, and so people will know that you send more hates and you
Mm.
share your
Then
ideas.
then it's a bit different, because it's not only message classification. It's
Yes.
also through time. There is
Exactly.
harassment. There is, and that's a bit different problem because you may need to consider that what if someone is hateful but very slightly hateful but every
Yeah.
day, as
Yeah.
opposed to someone that one day is very very hateful, like horrible messages, but once.
Yes.
And how would
Yeah.
you tackle this? It's not
That's
so
super
obvious. It's
interesting.
not
I feel
so
like it's
obvious.
setting thresholds, and you mentioned it a lot, but it's like really defining what is hateful and what do
Mm.
we mean by it, and like, yeah, super interesting. I mean, wow. Well, we don't have much more time, so I want
Yeah.
to ask you a few things
Yeah.
about. So we talked about GPT. We need to talk about ChatGPT, but
Yeah.
I want to talk about ChatGPT and have your vision on it and how it changed NLP.
Mhm.
But I want to mix it with the gaming part that we mentioned
Ah, yeah.
earlier.
There's yeah.
So
Okay. Let me
so
think.
my
Yeah.
idea before asking you about ChatGPT is you mentioned about like how you were able to like define NPCs that will be happy or angry or anything.
Mm.
So I understand that in the coding, for example, if this NPC, if you do some X actions
Mm.
and this NPC,
Mm.
because you did these actions, have this state, this mood, is it like happy, for example, then there is a 30% chance that it will do
Mhm.
something
Yep.
or like or whatever. So but well, this is programming game, and but I'm super interesting to hear about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So if this guy is happy and he's going to do some things, it could mean that if you use ChatGPT and like it's kind of doing a query to ChatGPT about tell me in a happy way that this.
Mhm.
And so how would you relate this? First of all, what do you think about ChatGPT like in general
Well.
and because everyone's
Mhm.
talking about it like in short like how it might change and
Oh
impact and
yeah.
maybe
Mhm.
in game developing how do you see ChatGPT being used?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Big question
First.
here.
Yeah. No. First, it's amazing. I love it. It's so powerful. It's, as I said, not without defects. The powerful stuff is that you can do many things with it. Like, I don't know, explaining a theorem by talking like a pirate. Like, that's so crazy, and that works. So, and the main defect is about truth and how it can. It's a language model. It is not conscious. It has no meaning of truth, and therefore it can give you blatant contradiction or like things that are plainly wrong, and you have to use it carefully. But for the creative, I mean, it was like the GPT approach is like for the creative people, people in the creative domain, or also with all the things that are happening in the image generation area with DALL-E 2, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney,
Yes.
all this work, and they are doing a lot of things. But for creative people, I think it's very useful. And for games, it might also be useful. I know that it has been already used in some cases, such as I know that a guy has done a Mountain Blade, a Warband game. You know, it's like a first-person game, action game, and he connected an NPC to ChatGPT and was able to like really talk to him. Actually, it had like a and I guess he had a prompt such as imagine you are a peasant in this village and you give some
Yes.
information and then
Mm-hmm.
you interact with the character.
Okay.
However, so you can do that, of course.
Mm-hmm.
You build your prompt by explaining the context of the interaction, and then you could chat with the character. Um, you can also do it with GPT directly, GPT-3, no problem. Huh? And the thing is that there are several shortcomings. It's not
Okay.
that simple. It's not that simple. First, you would have to remember the past interaction too. That is, it's not just one interaction. We
Yes.
know that there are context dependent. They can use some context, but is it possible to have like one interaction one day, one interaction another day, a third interaction like 2 days later, and the character remembers all this past interaction? Maybe it's the case. I don't know. It's something to explore. But the main problem I see with this approach is
Mm-hmm.
how would you convey events in the world, in the game world, to the agent. That is, imagine there's a murder somewhere in front of the peasant or
Mm-hmm.
the character, and the character has to react to this event. So you would have to encode the fact that there is a murder
Yes.
in the text prompt. So you may do it, but you would have either to provide it in a formal form or maybe in a natural language form. That's also something to try. And in any case, the if you want to use ChatGPT as a behavioral model, that is
Mm-hmm.
how the character should react to this murder, then you would have to maybe ask ChatGPT, how would you react to this? Something like that. Then you have to use the answer back and
Yes.
put it in your game. So you would have
Mm-hmm.
to ask in a formal form, how would you react? That is, give me an action label, for instance. Therefore, you need in
Yes.
your prompt also to encode the different kind of action labels that
Yes.
your game is able to consume. Um, Alternatively, you would have to parse it. If it's not already in formal form, you would have to parse it, which makes it much harder because you may have something not interpretable and the character has to react.
Mm.
Also, it's you have all the complexity of the embodied situation. That is,
Yes.
what happens if the character does not see the murder? I mean, he's looking like this way, but he has no awareness of what's behind. So you need first to consider his view, and you have to consider all sorts of context aspects. What about the character who is murdered? Is his enemy? Like if it's his own enemy, then he would say, "Oh, I'm happy the guy is murdered. Well, okay, cool." But then you would have to encode that.
Mm.
And so you would have somehow to model the mental state
Yes.
of the character. And where do you encode it? Whether do you encode it in the game or as a state? Because in the end, the character will have to act in the world.
Mm.
Or you encode it in the text, like in the past history, like
Mm.
you see the character, but it's your own enemy. How would you react? This kind
Mm.
of thing. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Like every
intricate.
NPC have like to have one knowledge model to their self,
Yeah,
and like you go and add pieces, and these pieces
of course.
have to be able to send.
And the complexity of the situation is how far you want to go, because despite the fact that you have a very powerful open-ended behavioral model, you
Yes.
still have to it's a bit like the problems you have in supervised learning, where you would have to carefully model your problem. That is, you would have to, for instance, in supervised learning, you would have to model your classes. What are the classes you want? How many? What kind of structure they have, and
Mm.
what kind of problem. And in this situation, in the interaction between the world and the behavioral or reasoning model that
Yes.
we would do in ChatGPT, you have in any case to do this modeling.
Mm.
Um, so unless we build an end-to-end system that does the game world, does the text language, the text aspect and reasoning
Yes.
in end to end, and they may they may be able to do it because you know in reinforcement learning they are able, given a picture, to play the game, just the pixels.
Mm.
So it may be possible, but that's a
Ah,
future task.
that's super interesting.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'm looking at the time,
Yeah.
so I think that's perfect for the episode of today. I have just three little questions for
Hmm.
everyone who's watching right now. So the first one is, in a short way, how do you keep? You're so passionate about a lot of things. I'm sure a lot of things we didn't know today, because 1 hour is not enough
Mm.
to know all about yourself. But video games, NLP, you've been in research, you've been into private, in finance. Today you're working with psychologists. You're super interesting in the languages itself. How do you keep learning and being curious about things?
Well, actually, mostly YouTube. Actually, mostly YouTube because there's a lot of content. There's a
Mm.
lot of very, very talented YouTubers or that like explain a lot of things. So it gives you the first thing. And if you want to go further, of course, YouTube is not enough. Even though there are some channels that are pretty good. Then yeah, I sometimes read papers. That happens much less, of course, than what I used to do in the public domain, where it was my everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, YouTube is a wonderful source of information, and for me, it's really great. Of
Okay.
course, I also read some articles or blog posts, like on Medium or this kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, but mostly YouTube actually.
Awesome. Thanks.
That's
Do you have a YouTuber top of mind that you would recommend to for
for
people to check out?
yeah, Yannick Kilchner, he's Kilcher, yeah, I think is really good, it's really nice, and he has a tone in his video that is very like he likes to pick some top topics and are a bit not aggressive, but like he's confronting ideas,
Yes.
and in a way that is really pleasant, I think.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot. If For everyone who is listening, if they want to connect with you, know more about yourself, or whether it's for your freelance or ask you questions, all of that, how can people reach out? What are your platforms or your socials?
Oh, I'm not that much on social medias and social networks. However, yeah, you can reach me by mail. I answer by mail, like a.denis at natlan.ai. That's
Mm.
my mail address. Yeah, but I'm not really communicating a lot. Working on
Mm.
my project, my stuff, my game, and for customers, working a lot, but less communicating than yourself, I guess.
You have a website though, right? Where we
Yeah,
can find a lot of your projects, your coding, what
yeah.
you've done, and all
The yeah
that.
yeah that's natlan.ai, natlan, and yeah, there's everything there. Most of the things I've done and I've
Mm.
worked on. And
Mm.
there's a game, but if you try to look at the game, just wait it that it loads. I should improve the loading screen, which is not there. But yeah, yeah, have fun.
Thanks for the specification. And last questions. And before asking you this last question, I want to thank you a lot for coming on this podcast, sharing all your experiences with us. I really enjoyed learning more about your work and what you do. And I'm super aligned, and I really enjoy what Erudit is doing today. And I look forward to see how do you implement AI in your games in the future. My last question is, do you have a message for anyone who is listening? It could be career wise, about AI, NLP, or whatever you feel like sharing, but do you have a message for the audience?
um I would say learn statistics. Learn statistics, it's a very fundamental topic. And myself, as an engineer back then, it was not like the most important topics, but in machine learning, that's really important. If you
Hmm.
are a very good statistician, you understand really the data, that's like fundamental. So I had to learn it by myself after. But doing that in school, but I guess that now people are doing that in school. But if
Mm.
that's not your favorite matter, I would encourage you to look deeper into that. I know that in France it's not that much, or it's not the main topic. And I'm not sure if right now it is or not in current schools.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, that's a very important topic that I think it spawns many areas in machine learning. And as I said, that the data is like the crucial part, and you need
Mm.
to know your data, you need to know how it works, and yeah. That's it. That would be my
Awesome.
advice, and have fun too.
Thanks. Well, thanks a lot, Alexandre, and thanks for everyone for staying up. If you're still listening and here at the podcast, you're a real one. Thanks a lot, and we see you on another episode. Bye.